Oh, Lordy. It is so hot right now. It is like 91 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't even know what that is in Celsius. You know, at some point I would say I'm sweating like a pig, but since getting pigs, I've learned that pigs don't actually sweat. But I need to have a conversation with you guys about something that's happened here on the farm. And it kind of all finished going down yesterday, and I've been dreading making this video. I was going to make it first thing this morning and kept putting it off. But now as I'm finally done with all my farm work and I'm about to go inside and clean up, I figured I'd sit down and have a conversation with you guys first about this. So buckle up, because this is going to be a hard one to swallow, and it's definitely going to be a hard one to share. So on our farm, we raise a wide variety of animals at this point. We raise cattle, we raise ducks, we raise chickens, we raise pigs. I still have 2 beehives active going around the farm, and we also raise geese. In fact, of all of my animal operations, so far, geese have been the most successful, and I don't know, I still haven't been able to find anybody to disprove this, but I'm pretty sure up until this point, my farm has been the largest goose farm in Vermont. Of course, being the largest goose farmer in Vermont is kind of like being the fastest snail in the garden, I guess. It's still a relatively small thing to be doing. But yeah, over the years, I feel like I've learned a lot around how to raise geese, how to turn geese into a business, the different parts of the goose business that our farm participates in. And at this point, the business model that we've had has been, we have a breeding flock of, roughly each year it's about 20 geese and ganders. Like, some years it's been 18, some it was like 22. This past year, I think it was 19. But we have this breeding flock. And with that breeding flock, when they start laying their eggs in February, I take all of those eggs and I begin selling them in the mail to folks as fertilized eggs. That goes on for a couple of months, but then starting like in, usually like mid-ish April, I start gathering goose eggs and I start hatching them here on the farm. In years past, starting with my first goose hatch, that usually happens like in mid-May, because it takes about 30 days to go from incubating a goose egg to actually having a gosling. In years past, I basically start with that first mid-May hatch, and then every week for the next several weeks, almost a month straight, I'm just hatching new batches of goslings. For the first 4 or 5 weeks, they are in a brooder, only getting grain, and maybe I'll give them some greens as a treat. But then eventually they start to free range more and more, and by week 6 or 7, they're fully free ranging and they're fully living off of pasture, and I'm not feeding them. They spend the entire summer grazing the pastures here on our farm, eating grass, growing larger. And then in the fall, I take a couple of days and I have like one big goose call where I get a couple friends together. We work for like 2 days straight, just processing geese. And then I sell those geese to folks like you. And that's a big part of my farm business. I'll also do other things, like I'll sell live adult birds, I'll sell some goslings, but really the main part of the business is selling the eggs up front, and then at the end selling goose for meat, which is kind of a rare thing because not a lot of farms do goose for meat, particularly in this day and age. And I think the number one reason for that is because like a good size, healthy chicken carcass, you can have like, 5-6 pounder, and that's a pretty hefty chicken. While meanwhile, a goose, they range probably between like 9 pounds of a carcass to all the way, like I've had like, I think the largest one's like probably 16, 17 pounds processed. So that's not like the weight of the animal, but like after plucking and innards and all of that, you're left with a bird that 16.8 pounds was my largest goose ever processed. What's nice about doing that as well is I'm able to charge a premium. Like in the last couple of years, I've been charging like $15 a pound. And so that makes raising geese very profitable for the farm. It fits with the ethics of the farm. I get to raise these animals from end to end, and it has been just a very awesome, rewarding experience. I've had this dream of one day offering ethically produced foie gras, where I raise these geese who get fattened up from the land so quickly that their livers actually turn fatty, versus using like the horrible practice of gavage where you're jamming a tube down the goose's throat. This is where Eduardo Sousa lives. So Eduardo Sousa, who you guys have heard me talk about in my videos before, he is the guy who raises geese here in Spain, and he produces a special kind of, call it ethical foie gras. It's foie gras that doesn't use gavage. It means the geese or ducks don't get the feeding feeding tube jammed down their throat to fatten up the livers and actually make the good and yumminess that is foie gras. I think after doing this for a few years now, I can say that I probably won't ever be in a situation where I'm able to do that. I think the difference between a farm like my farm and Eduardo Suso's farm really comes down to climate. Because he's in the warm climate of the Extremadura region of Spain, the types of plants he has and the types of plants he can offer year-round are significantly more fattening than what I can do here in Vermont. And so at least at this stage of the game, that might not be possible. But I'm going to keep trying because I feel like if I have geese that end up that way, I'm giving them a really good life and a really good habitat. So in typical years, that is the shape of my goose business here on the farm. And it's been really rewarding and I've very much enjoyed it up until this year. I know I made a previous video about this earlier this spring, but I have been having some real problems with my goose business this year. Number one, for whatever reason, starting like in late March, early April, my goose eggs started to drop. Like I was getting so many goose eggs up front this year, you know, towards the middle of the spring, or actually just the start of the spring, I should say. It was like a light switch and it just like cut in half to what it typically has been in years past. And so that was one problem I knew I was going to be dealing with, and I knew I was going to have less eggs to hatch. And having fewer eggs to hatch means having fewer birds that ultimately hatch, because, you know, you're never going to have like 100% hatching rate. Typically, what I strive for is somewhere between a 50 and 60% hatching rate with geese, which after doing this for a couple of years, I think is pretty good. I haven't been able to find people who are like, oh, I'm at 75% or something like that. And so it's an incremental game. I've done things over the years to improve my hatching rate. And so I felt like I was going to have better success. But I also knew I was starting with a much smaller pool this year. And so it was going to be tough sledding for the goose business this year to begin with. But I cannot tell you just how horrible of an understatement that is turning out to be. Because as you guys know, I've had several goose hatches that I've tried to attempt this year. I so far have not been successful with any of them. Like here, let me take you into my hatching room. So yeah, one of the big projects I worked on this winter was building this little hatching room. This room is insulated and climate controlled. It's got an electric heater in it so that in the winter months I can keep it perfectly stable. Because when you're hatching birds, keeping your climate stable both within the incubator, which is the box that you typically keep to keep them all warm, as well as even the area where the incubator is super, super important. And the work I did this winter to make this a climate controlled room actually worked out really well. The temperature stays always consistent. Like I'll flash up a graph right here for you to see. You know, it's always staying pretty much between 65 degrees and 73 degrees. I really work hard to maintain that temp. And that's exactly what, you know, these incubators need. And in terms of my incubator, here it is. It is this Brinzy Ova Easy cabinet incubator. And so it's a structure that basically has these trays. You put the eggs in on the trays. The incubator keeps warm. It has a reservoir for water to keep the humidity controlled. It actually even has this little humidity pump that sits up top that connects into the incubator. And so that combination of steady temperature and steady humidity is exactly what the incubator is supposed to do. But unfortunately, that is not how things have been playing out this year. Because this year is turning out to be an all-time record, horrible, worst hatching season. And because I don't like to BS you guys, I gotta tell you, I'm very worried and I feel like a failure. And I'm very frustrated with myself. Because like most things that go wrong on the farm, it's pretty much all my fault. Like, mostly my fault. And by mostly, I don't mean like 51%. I mean like 85, 90% my fault. You see, because that incubator that I just showed you inside there, although it has worked really well for me over the last couple of years, this year it's no longer working properly, and my inability to act quickly has cost me my goose hatching season. Over the last 6 weeks or so, I have run 5 different batches of eggs through that incubator.
Good morning, little guys. Is anybody coming out yet? Oh boy, I bet you guys come out this morning. This should be fun. Hello guys, how's it going? Can't wait for you to hatch.
And I have not had a successful hatch with any single one. And to be very honest, a lot of the hatches that I have run, I've been doing it in the name of trying to figure out what's going wrong. And I guess if there is any silver lining in this story I'm going to tell you all, it's that I think I know what's wrong. And so I guess that knowledge might help me some way, somehow in the future someday. So as I documented in a previous video earlier this year, goose hatch number 1 was a complete and utter failure. I try it again. I tried again. I tried again. I tried again. I think that's 5, right? Did I say 5 again? I don't remember. And what's really frustrating about this is all of the hatches would get really close. Like when I would pull the eggs out and I would candle them to check to see like if they were okay and if they were hatching, I would see egg development. The timing of that egg development would look okay. Nothing completely abnormal. Like I was feeling good about the direction that things were heading in. But then as soon as I would go into lockdown with my eggs, everything would turn disastrous. And for you guys who are not familiar with that term lockdown, so whenever you're hatching eggs, whether it be chickens or ducks or turkeys or quail or geese, like whenever you're doing that hatching activity, you know, for the first major chunk of the hatching cycle, what you're going to want to do is make sure that you have a specific target humidity, and it varies a little bit from bird type to bird type, as well as a specific temperature, as well as the fact that you want to rotate your eggs, which I'll talk more about in a minute. You want to be doing all of those things on a regular basis. You even also want to be cooling your eggs on a daily basis to simulate what happens when a mother bird usually gets up once a day to like go get a drink of water and get some food and maybe poop or do something like that. And most good high-end incubators are going to do all of those things for you. Like my incubator is supposed to do all of those things for me. But then what happens is about 2 or 3 days before your hatch is actually going to start. And the day is going to depend on the type of bird. Like, so for chickens, I believe it's 21 days. And so like usually you go into lockdown around day 18. With ducks, it's 28 days, and so it's usually day 25. With geese, it's 30 days, and so usually by day 26 or 27, it's typically when I'm going into lockdown. Now, what would happen is these eggs would look good, like they were developing for the most part, all the way up until going into lockdown. And then what would happen is, as I went into lockdown, things would just not happen the way they were supposed to. Like the first batch didn't even pip, like meaning like the birds started to crack through, like nothing happened at all. The second batch actually pipped a little bit early, so did the third batch. The fourth batch didn't pip at all. And then this fifth batch, which has been the most tragic, which I'm not trying to string you guys out here, but I'll get to that point in a minute. That one also had the birds pipping early. So typically like day 29, you're going to start to see them like peck their nose out of the shell. And this was actually on late day 26, early day 27 was when they were starting to pip. And so because of this inconsistency with each hatch, I started to monitor and measure everything a little differently. You know, typically with the incubator, it has its own like temperature gauge and its own humidity gauge, and you can use that to rely on it. So for the first batch, I just did everything as normal and didn't even have like an extra like thermometer inside there to test anything. The second and third batches, I actually took like a little digital thermometer to track exactly what the temperature was inside there. And for the most part, it was very, very consistent. I did the same thing for the fourth hatch, and it was all consistent as well. But then I started to think about it, and the fact that the birds were starting to hatch early actually got me realizing that, well, maybe I'm having a problem with my humidity, because the amount of humidity that you have in your incubator can actually dictate hatching time. Too much humidity will actually make your eggs hatch slower, and too little humidity will actually make your eggs hatch quicker, because I don't know if this is a fact or if this is just my speculation, but like I picture it being like, oh, the baby bird's drinking up all of the, you know, egg white that's inside of there quicker because they don't have enough other moisture. And so that's why it happens. I don't know if that's actually the case, so you might not want to listen to me on that one, but that's how I keep it straight in my head in terms of which happens one way or the other. And so on that fifth hatch, I actually had a special, I think it's called hydrometer, tracking the humidity inside along with the temperature. What was happening was the humidity control on my incubator was completely out of whack with what was the humidity inside. Like, I'm talking like, it looked like I was at 55% humidity, which is a really good target for geese. Like, you usually want to be between 50 and 60% for most of the hatch. And then in the last couple of days, you might want to jack it up to like 65% because it just makes it easier for the eggs to hatch. Well, what I was finding is that both it was underestimating how much humidity, and on top of it all, the humidity was swinging wildly. Like, you know, at some points in the day, it might be like 20% humidity, and then it jumps up to 60%, and then it jumps back to 20%. And so it's just like all over the place. Like, I'm showing you a chart here to give you a sense of the data of what it actually looks like, and you can see it's like a total mess. And so I realized I had this problem with my either humidity pump, humidity sensor, or something with the incubator that was giving me these bad readings. So what I realized is if I wanted to try to attribute my problems to anything, the humidity was the most likely culprit. The other thing that I think is a potential culprit is too, I would wake up in the morning and I'd come out here to check on the eggs. And what I would notice is that there was this fault error that would trigger within the incubator saying that the automatic turning feature, which like basically the eggs sit on that tray and they rotate one way and then they rotate another. And what I would have is it would say it was a fault and I would have to like unplug the incubator, let it reset. And once it would reset, the turning function would work again. But then like 2 or 3 days later, I would have the same problem again. And so this Brinzy incubator was having this problem of doing both of these things. And I think that inconsistency was what's created my hatching issues. And so yes, that is ultimately what was leading to the poor hatching situation. Now I know there's probably a lot of people screaming at me through their video screen as I talk saying,
"Gosh darn it, Morgan, why didn't you just buy a new incubator? What's wrong with you?"
And so to address that criticism, I have bought a new incubator. I'm just waiting for it to come. The one that I got, it's a different brand, and because I wanted to go with a different brand and has like a actually pretty good reputation, and it's sort of like a newer one on the market. That's all good about it, but the problem is it's coming from overseas and it was going to take a couple of weeks to get here. And with goose hatching, you have a very finite window. Basically, your geese are going to only start laying eggs from like say late January, early February through mid to late June. And particularly for me who starts later in the season because of my cold climate, it's an extremely narrow window. And so the timing of when that incubator was going to arrive, well, it's probably going to arrive by the time I start hatching chickens this year. It's not matching up with my goose hatching season. But on this last hatch, since I knew all of the problems that I was facing, you know, I was pretty certain of it all by like week 2 or 3. I watched this hatch more closely than any hatch I've ever watched before. And since I was carefully monitoring my humidity and carefully monitoring my turning and making sure everything was working there, my hope was I could kind of like muscle my way through one final hatch. But the truth of the matter is it did not go down that way. Got something we need to check on, guys. Got some eggs that are starting to pip, I think. See one that's pipped. Hopefully we'll have more very soon. This is my last attempt to hatch goslings this year. So what you're seeing here is actually for my last video, I intended to run that part as like a tease to see what was going to happen and show people that, oh boy, look, I'm going to have some geese hatching and like, isn't this going to be exciting? Because I was so super excited about it all. Yeah, because as the hatch was entering into lockdown, I had, I think it was like 24, maybe 25 eggs ready to go that all had, you know, shown signs of life, and I had high hopes that they would hatch. And so when I saw the first birds pip and crack, I got really excited because I was like, oh wow, it's gonna happen. I'm definitely gonna be getting goslings this year, because I was very worried that I wouldn't get any. So I started to watch, and there were 2 eggs specifically that pipped. Typically, you don't want to keep opening and closing the incubator because that can actually shrink wrap the birds. And so I kept watching. I kept seeing if it was happening and like seeing what was going on. 24 hours later, they still hadn't emerged from the eggs, and there were still only 2 that had pipped. And by the time I got to 48 hours for one of them, one of the 2 birds that had pipped had actually passed away. And so I decided to take action and pull the other one out and assist its hatch. And now at this stage of the game, I've assisted hatching probably, I don't know, somewhere in the neighborhood of 30, 35 birds. And while at this point I feel like I know what to do and I'm pretty good at doing it, I also know that when you do an assisted hatch with a bird, particularly with goslings, your survival rate's gonna be low. The reason that bird is having trouble hatching is because it's underdeveloped and has some developmental issues. And sometimes I'll do a self-hatch and that baby bird will survive and it will end up doing okay and turn into a normal, healthy goose. But definitely more than half the time, that bird fails to thrive and they end up dying. And so it's just happened a lot over the years. And so even though Allison and I did our best to really nurse and nurture that one bird that we did the assisted hatch with, just last night, it didn't make it. And yeah, it sadly passed away. And so, yeah, I had this hope of having one lone gosling on the farm, and unfortunately, that is not what we're going to have this year. And so it's looking like 2024 is going to be the year without goslings. And it sucks. And like I said, I feel like it's my fault. Hey, buddy boy. How's it going, pal? You hanging out there in the hot, hot sun? Come with me, buddy. I got some treats for you. I've got some doggy ice cream for my doggy. Yeah, this is the perfect treat for a hot day like this, isn't it, pal? Thought you'd like it. I'm pretty sure Abby's out sleeping by the heifer calves. I have a cup for her as well if she gets out. Right now, it's just Toby time. You're such a good boy. You love your ice cream. I think this one is peanut butter and chicken flavor, which is not exactly the type of ice cream I would personally enjoy. Mr. Toby Dog absolutely loves it. Careful, kid, you're gonna give yourself an ice cream headache. Oh, you're just chowing it? Toby, you're a savage. And then he's gonna have an after ice cream pee. For those of you wondering though, Deb and her kids are doing well. I think it's time for them to upgrade to a dish instead of this. They keep making a mess out of their drinker, which is always the sign that they've outgrown their drinker. It's a hot day. You're gonna want water. Here, I'll give you some greens to pick at too. So you know, Deb, you were supposed to move, but now I don't think you guys are gonna have to move anytime soon.